How do you know if art is actually good? If the most technically superior artwork doesn't elicit some kind of emotional response from you, it has failed. One of the things people ask me sometimes is, how can you tell if a piece of art is good or bad? I remember many years ago, I was having a conversation with my dad. We could have been at a museum or something. I don't quite remember. It was a pretty good while ago. But he pointed out a painting and said, "Is that a good piece of art?" It caught me off guard because I just kind of mumbled something incoherent and it just kind of stalled and didn't really come up with a good answer because it was not something that I'd really put a lot of thought into at that time. But in the years since, I have put a lot of thought into it. This is where we get into a branch of philosophy called aesthetics. Now, the fundamental question of philosophy is what is good. So with that in mind, the fundamental question of aesthetics is what is beautiful, or in a more modern sense, what is art? That's really tricky because it is so subjective. I mean, isn't beauty in the eye of the beholder? Is art something art simply because somebody says it is? And since the early 1900s, the focus of art has not been so much on beauty as it is on creating some kind of an emotional response in the viewer. So the question, what is art, has been really sticky since about 1917 for sure, because of the time that Marcel Duchamp took a urinal, turned it on its back, and wrote "Our Mutt" on it and sent it into some exhibition. They rejected the entry because they didn't know who Our Mutt was, and it's a urinal. It was only after he revealed himself, because at that point he was already an established artist. So they said, okay, sure, we'll let you in. It still does not change the fact that art is subjective. Beauty is subjective. How do you handle something as subjective as this question, what is beautiful? Surely there is an objective way to measure that in some way, to measure the quality of art. I will admit there is some art that is very much bad. I mean, everybody can agree this is bad, but then sometimes there is bad art out there that is so bad it's good. I'm thinking of some of those guilty pleasure movies that people love. The acting is terrible, the plot is predictable, but you love it anyway, right? And I'm sure you can think of a movie like that, or some music, or some artwork that would fit that description for sure. How can you truly say whether a piece of art is good or bad? So I've come up with kind of a checklist for objectively talking about what makes a piece of art good or bad. There are 3 requirements I can think of right off the bat. The first 2 are pretty much understandable to just about anybody, and the third may be a little elusive depending on your level of education or awareness, but once you have that, it makes it that much more rewarding. So here are the 3 main criteria for judging the quality of a piece of art. Number 1, craftsmanship or technical skill. Number 2, adherence to the principles of design and composition. Number 3, reference to historical, cultural, and or literary context. So let's dig into that a little bit. Good craftsmanship is pretty easy to recognize, even if you're not trained at looking at art. You can tell pretty much right away whether it's sloppily made, does it hold up, is it substantial, is it falling apart. That's pretty easy to determine. And it's because we have an inherent appreciation of things that are well constructed, especially physical objects. Secondly, adherence to principles and rules of design and composition. These things are usually intuited before we understand them intellectually, before we consciously identify them. Knowing things like line, unity, perspective, figure and ground, contrast, things like that. Knowing all those terms, it gives you a vocabulary to better appreciate a piece of art beyond just saying I like it or I don't, which, by the way, can be very offensive to an artist if that's all you say, like, oh, I like it, because you haven't taken the time to truly appreciate it. It comes across as intellectually lazy. But when those elements of design are present, it sparks something in us that our brains recognize immediately. It's very satisfying when things line up the way they're supposed to. Our brains recognize those patterns intuitively, so we appreciate art, again, on an intuitive level before we find it intellectually satisfying. The third criterion for judging whether art is good or bad is whether a piece of art seems to understand its place in art history. Art doesn't get made in a vacuum. The artist should be aware of the art that has come before it, whether that's 5 years ago or 5 centuries ago. Appreciating art hinges on being aware of the context in which it was created. This context can be anything from current affairs to political events, current events, cultural happenings, scientific discoveries, or references to literature and music and poetry and all that, as well as making some kind of a reference to the masters in some way. On that note, there is a fantastic video series out there called Everything is a Remix. I highly suggest you go check that out and do a deep dive into that. Now, have you ever seen artwork that checks all the boxes, but it just falls flat? It is so academic, so technically impressive, has good composition and color, and it refers to something in literature or it quotes the masters in some way, but it feels trite and derivative. It feels unoriginal, or like somebody's just trying to make a buck and pass themselves off as being original when they are not. It feels insincere and gross, honestly, and I think a lot of us can spot that a mile away. On the other hand, I have seen art that breaks all the rules and it can become elevated to rock star status. I've seen art that's made with, not the best materials. It could be made out of house paint, or the compositions are really basic and rudimentary, but the soul of the art speaks to me on a visceral level. You can tell that there is something important in what you're looking at. Right now I'm thinking of the art of Howard Finster or Jean-Michel Basquiat. Their artwork is raw, and it's not very pretty in the traditional sense, but the emotional impact is undeniable. This brings me to what I think is one of the most important factors for a piece of artwork to be successful. It has to have some kind of emotional connection with the recipient. The best art makes you feel something. It can be the most technically superior artwork, but if it doesn't elicit some kind of emotional response from you, it's failed. I think this is what we mean when we say a piece of art or music has soul. I remember seeing bumper stickers years ago where it said, "Drum machines ain't got no soul." And I think that's why so many people are turned off by AI art, because there's no soul, there's no depth to it. Sometimes AI knows all the rules all too well, to the point that it becomes really predictable, and it falls flat because there's no lived experience on the other side of it. Henry David Thoreau once said, "How vain it is to sit down to write when you have not stood up to live." That's why art that breaks the rules can work so well if it has a profound emotional impact. I've also seen art that is so technically sound and compositionally pleasing, and it actually elicits a sublime response, but on further inspection it reveals something sinister. I'm thinking in particular of the awe-inspiring architecture of the Italian fascist regime. It's beautiful, but it masks deep cruelty and racism. It's gorgeous and it follows all the rules, but I think that's kind of the point. And this is why the study of aesthetics is so important. This is why it matters. Aesthetics forces you to go deeper than the surface of a piece of artwork and begin a discussion about the values that are really present in the artwork. What are you really seeing? Go a little bit deeper than the surface and figure out what you're really looking at. This is where transformation begins to take place. Transformation in the recipient, transformation in the artist. A true aesthetic experience does not leave you unchanged. That's not to say that every single brush stroke means something, but there is purpose behind everything that the artist creates, even if that purpose is just to be whimsical and make somebody smile. So what about the feeling that I'm trying to convey, the feeling that I'm chasing in my art? When I make art, I want you to feel like you've just woken up from a dream and you're trying to remember what you dreamed, but you can't quite place it. Or I'm trying to capture the sensation of climbing to the top of a mountain. It's cold, the wind is biting into your skin, but you don't care because you made it to the top and you're proud of yourself for making that climb. Other times I'm trying to convey a sense of spirituality, pointing at something just beyond reach, just beyond the world that we know. It's very close, but we can't quite touch it. Those are the objectives that I see as the criteria for good art. It's well made, it makes use of design and composition principles, and it understands its place in art history. But the most important factor is that it makes an emotional connection to the viewer. If you also think that art should make you feel something and elicit that emotional response, or if you disagree, if you think it just needs to be pretty, please leave a comment and let me know what you think. Also, be sure to like, share, subscribe, all the things, and share this with all your friends who love the arts too. All right, take care, everybody. See you soon.